This doesn't mean that you may not also teach through doing. For example, by pointing out how to disidentify from the mind, recognize unconscious patterns within oneself, and so on. But who you are is always a more vital teaching and a more powerful transformer of the world than what you say, and more essential even than what you do. Furthermore, to recognize the primacy of being and thus work on the level of cause does not exclude the possibility that your compassion may simultaneously manifest on the level of doing and of effect. By elevating suffering, whether you come across it, when a hungry person asks you for bread and you have some, you will give it. But as you give the bread, even though your intention may only be very brief, what really matters is in this moment of shared being, of which the bread is only a symbol. A deep healing takes place within it. In that moment, there is no giver, no receiver. But there shouldn't be any hunger and starvation in the first place. How can we create a better world without tackling evils such as hunger and violence first? All evils are the effect of unconsciousness. You can elevate the effects of unconsciousness, but you cannot eliminate them unless you eliminate their cause. True change happens within, not without. If you feel called upon to elevate sufferings in the world, that is a very noble thing to do. But remember not to focus exclusively on the outer, otherwise you will encounter frustration and despair. Without a profound change in human consciousness, the world's suffering is a bottomless pit. So don't let your compassion become one-sided. Empathy with someone else's pain or lack and a desire to help needs to be balanced with a deeper realization of the eternal nature of all life and the ultimate illusion of all pain. Then let your presence, let your peace flow into whatever you do, and you will be working on the levels of effect and cause simultaneously. This also applies if you are supporting a movement designed to stop deeply unconscious humans from destroying themselves, each other, and the planet, and from continuing to inflict dreadful suffering on the other sentient beings. Remember, just as you cannot fight the darkness, so you cannot fight unconsciousness. If you try to do so, the polar opposites will become strengthened more and more deeply entrenched. You will become identified with one of the polarities. You will create an enemy, so be drawn into unconsciousness yourself. Raise awareness by disseminating information, or at the most, practice passive resistance. But make sure that you carry no resistance within, no hatred, no negativity. Love your enemies, said Jesus, which of course means have no enemies. Once you get involved in working on the level of effect, it is all too easy to lose yourself in it. Stay alert and very, very present. The casual level needs to remain your primary focus, the teaching of enlightenment, your main purpose, and peace, your most prestigious gift to the world. So when we are talking about all these things, it's very clear that, first and foremost, you need to be very, very clear that you need to be in a state of awareness. You need to be in a state where you're consciously aware. And anything which is outside of you, if it is affecting you, that means there is still some connection, some gap with who you are and who your true self is, that is still there in the making. So please work on yourself first before trying to go and help others or be a cause of change, because it's only when you are aware of who you truly are, that is one of the major reasons why you will be able to help others. Because unless or until you're not aware of who you truly are, your empathy will overpower you when you're trying to help others. It'll get you in a state where you're overwhelmed by the other person's response, and you are, unaware that slowly and slowly you will fall into that same place. It's like a doctor. He needs to be sympathetic towards the patients, but if he becomes overwhelmed by the patients, can he help them? No. So he needs to be clear where is the boundary that needs to be. So in this journey, it is about sharing with others, but it is also about establishing your ground first. Because जितना strong आपका ground होगा, उतना आप किसी को help कर सकते हैं. So chapter 10, the meaning of surrender. Acceptance of the now. You mentioned surrender a few times. I don't like that idea. It sounds somewhat fatalistic. If we always accept the way things are, we are not going to make any effort to improve them. It seems to me what progress is all about, both in our personal lives and collectively, is not to accept the limitations of the present, but to strive to go beyond them and create something better. If we hadn't done this, we would still be living in caves. How do you reconcile surrender with changing things and getting things done? To some people, surrender may have negative connotations, implying defeat, giving up, failing to rise to the challenge of life, becoming lethargic, and so on. True surrender, however, is something entirely different. It does not mean to passively put up with whatever situation you find yourself in and to do nothing about it. Nor does it mean to cease making plans or initiating positive action. Surrender is the simple but profound wisdom of yielding to rather than opposing the flow of life. The only place where you can experience the flow of life is the now. So to surrender is to accept the present moment unconditionally and without reservation. It is to relinquish inner resistance to what is. Inner resistance is to say no to what is through mental judgment and emotional negativity. It becomes particularly pronounced when things go wrong, which means that there is a gap between the demands or rigid expectations of your mind and what is. This is the pain gap. If you have lived long enough, you will know that things go wrong quite often. It is precisely at those times that surrender needs to be practiced if you want to eliminate pain and sorrow from your life. Acceptance of what is immediately frees you from your mind identification and thus reconnects you with being. Resistance is the mind. Surrender is a purely inner phenomena. It does not mean that on the outer level you cannot take action and change the situation. In fact, it is not the overall situation that you need to accept when you surrender, but just the tiny segment called the now. For example, if you were stuck in the mud somewhere, you wouldn't say, okay, I resign myself to being stuck in the mud. Resignation is not surrender. You don't need to accept an undesirable or unpleasant life situation, nor do you need to deceive yourself and say there is nothing wrong with being stuck in the mud. No, you recognize fully that you want to get out of it. You then narrow your attention down to the present moment without mentally labeling it in any way. This means that there is no judgment of the now. Therefore, there is no resistance, no emotional negativity. You accept the isness of this moment. Then you take action and do all that you can to do to get out of the mud. Such action I call positive action. It is far more effective than negative action, which arises out of anger, despair, or frustration. Until you achieve the desired result, you continue to practice surrender by refraining from labeling the now. Let me give you a visual analogy to illustrate the point I am making. You are walking along a path at night, surrounded by a thick fog, but you have a powerful flashlight that cuts through the fog and creates a narrow, bare space in front of you. The fog is your life situation, which includes past and future. The flashlight is your conscious presence, and the dear space is the now. Non-surrender hardens your psychological form, the shell of the ego, and so creates a sense of separateness. The world around you and people in particular come to be perceived as threatening. The unconscious compulsion to destroy others through judgment arises, as does the need to compete and dominate. Even nature becomes your enemy, and your perceptions and interpretations are governed by fear. The mental disease that we call paranoia is only a slightly more acute form of this normal but dysfunctional state of consciousness. Not only your psychological form, but also your physical form, your body becomes hard and rigid through resistance. Tension arises in different parts of the body, and the body as the whole contracts. The free flow of life, energy through the body, which is essential for its healthy functioning, is greatly restricted. Body work and certain forms of physical therapy can be helpful in restoring this flow. But unless you practice surrender in your everyday life, those things can only give temporary symptom relief, since the cause, the resistance pattern, has not been dissolved. There is something within you that remains unaffected by the transient circumstances that make up your life situation. And only through surrender do you have access to it. It is your life, your very being, which exists eternally in the timeless realm of the present. Finding this life is the one thing that is needed, that Jesus talked about. So, it's very, very clear. Surrender कोई negative word नहीं है. A lot of people feel कि नहीं, surrender में मेरा तो कोई control नहीं है. मैंने क्या है, ये तो ऐसे थोड़ा होता है. What about my needs? What about my wants? What about my desire? Everything is there. Surrender does not mean resistance. Once you are resisting, that means you are not surrendering. So surrender in terms is not a negative word. But see, resistance kahan se aa rahi hai? The resistance is coming from the mind, because the mind does not want to accept the situation the way it is, because it has a different notion. So the same situation is going to have different notions for everybody else, because every mind is going to perceive the situation in a different notion. So जो भी resistance आता है वो हमेशा mind से आता है. वो उसको जज करता है, वो उसको लेबल करता है कि ये तो ठीक नहीं है मेरे लिए, ऐसे कैसे हो गया. So whenever it is that you are resisting whatever is happening into your space, that is where you are not surrender. And surrender does not mean कि आप अपने हथियार डाल दो. You know, it's not the surrender of the army that you have no control. You are just going to enjoy what is happening, because anything that walks into your space is here for a reason. And that reason you need to figure out, because जब आप उसको एक premise of non-resistance से देखते हो कि okay, this is there in my space, nice, slightly uncomfortable, okay, but क्या सिखाने आ रहा है ये. जब हम उस premise से हर एक चीज को देखने की कोशिश करते हैं, then we start acknowledging what is as it is. Then we start slowly accepting what is as it is. And slowly, once that acceptance, once that wisdom starts sinking in, then you're there at surrender. And you will not come to know. It's not a conscious effort that you need to be in surrender. No. Surrender will happen very unconsciously through the conscious awareness. That's the beauty of surrender. Because once you start accepting the things, so deep down एक surrender की invisible layer create होनी शुरू हो जाती है, because you are accepting what is in your space as it is without any judgment or labeling. मेरे साथ कुछ भी हो रहा है, अच्छा है, बुरा है, मेरा माइंड बोल रहा है, मैं नहीं बोल रहा. बट जो हो रहा है, that is reality, that is the truth. That cannot be changed. The way my mind is going to perceive it, or the way your mind is going to perceive it, it is going to vary. So that means that is not permanent. It varies. The same situation varies from my mind, and the same situation varies from the other person's mind. That means what is there in the situation and the way your mind is interpreting that thing in the situation is different. So your interpretation is not reality, but the actual thing that is happening, that's a fact, that's a reality. हमें अपनी इंटरप्रिटेशन से नहीं उसको जज करना है, बिकॉज जब हम उस चीज को जज करते हैं, then the mind is at play, then the perception is at play. Then you are not working, it's the mind that is working. And since the start of the book, we've been talking that you're not your mind. Your mind has gotten to a space where you have identified him as your true self, and so the ego has been formed, which is looking for attention all the time. It is always judging, it is always expecting something, and it is always criticizing and complaining. उसके पास और कोई काम ही नहीं है. His entire portfolio is covered with jack. But जो true self, जब हम उसको accept करते हैं या acknowledge करते हैं first, then slowly the acceptance comes, and slowly the surrender will come. When we are accepting or acknowledging what is as it is, without the chatter, without the labeling, without the judgment of the mind. बुरा अच्छा mind बना रहा है, painful pleasurable आपको पता लग रहा है, because that's your feeling in the body. But then it's not that all painful experiences are bad or all painful experiences are good. Talk to a bodybuilder. The more pain, the more gain. He wants that pain because he knows the gain. So it's not, it's different for everything. So when you are just witnessing or just acknowledging, accepting what is as it is, without the chatter, without the labeling of the mind, then you are in the true surrender. And it's not that you don't need to work for yourself. whatever is it that you desire, whatever is it that you want, you need to work for it. वो आपको नहीं मिल रहा है, it's okay. Analyze the situation. What can I do better? But don't label that experience. The problem is when we get into that labeling and judgment of that experience, वो हमारे को प्रॉब्लम करता है, because वो बार बार हमें उधर ही लेके खड़ा करते हैं. अगर कोई चीज मेरे स्पेस में मुझे चाहिए और there is a specific desire I'm looking for, it is not coming, just question why. What is it that is missing? Anything can be analyzed, and not everything needs to come from a premise or a thought of self-pity or a self-judgment. Things can be analyzed as it is. Facts तो facts ही है, reality तो reality रहेगी. So whenever you are in a situation where you feel that this is not the way you wanted it to be, just analyze the situation with facts. Try to get your mind in a separate direction, and we know if it's the jack at play, then the mind is at play. So that's a clear indication. If you are judging, expecting, criticizing or complaining, that means it's the mind which is working, not you. So try to look at things from a premise where there is no jack. Then the true reality will definitely be in front of you. Then the true wisdom of what and why things are coming to your space will make much more clarity and will give you much more wisdom. If you find your life situation unsatisfactory or even intolerable, it is only by surrendering first that you can break the unconscious resistance patterns that perpetuates that situation. Surrender is perfectly compatible with taking action, initiating change, or achieving goals. But in the surrendered state, a totally different energy, a different quality flows into your doing. Surrender reconnects you with the source energy of being. And if your doing is infused with being, it becomes a joyful celebration of life, energy that takes you more deeply into the now. Through non-resistance, the quality of your consciousness, and therefore the quality of whatever you are doing or creating, is enhanced immeasurably. The results will then look after themselves and reflect that quality. We could call this surrendered action. It is not work as we have known it for thousands of years. As more humans awaken, the word work is going to disappear from our vocabulary, and perhaps a new word will be created to replace it. It is the quality of your consciousness at this moment that is the main determinant of what kind of future you will experience. So to surrender is the most important thing you can do to bring about positive change. Any action you take is secondary. No truly positive action can arise out of an unsurrendered state of consciousness. I can see that if I am in a situation that is unpleasant or unsatisfactory, and I completely accept the moment as it is, there will be no suffering or unhappiness. I will have risen above it. But I still can't quite see where the energy or motivation for taking action and bringing about change would come from there if there isn't a certain amount of dissatisfaction. In the state of surrender, you see very clearly what needs to be done and you take action, doing one thing at a time and focusing on one thing at a time. Learn from nature. See how everything gets accomplished and how the miracle of life unfolds without dissatisfaction or unhappiness. That's why Jesus said, look at the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. If your overall situation is unsatisfactory or unpleasant, Separate out this instant and surrender to what is. That's the flashlight cutting through the fog. Your state of consciousness then ceases to be controlled by external conditions. You are no longer coming from reaction and resistance. Then look at the specifics of the situation. Ask yourself, is there anything I can do to change the situation, improve it, or remove myself? If so, you take appropriate action. Focus not on the 100 things that you will or may have to do at some future time, but on the one thing you can do now. This doesn't mean you should not do any planning. It may well be that planning is the only thing you can do now. But make sure you don't start to run mental movies, project yourself into the future, and so lose the now. Any action you take may not bear fruit immediately. Until it does, do not resist what is. If there is no action you can take and you cannot remove yourself from the situation either, then use the situation to make you go more deeply into surrender, more deeply into the now, more deeply into the being. When you enter the timeless dimension of the present, change often comes about in strange ways without the need for a great deal of doing on your part. Life becomes helpful and cooperative. If inner factors such as fear, guilt, or inertia prevented you from taking action, they will dissolve in the light of your conscious presence. Do not confuse surrender with an attitude of I can't be bothered anymore or I just don't care anymore. If you look at it closely, you will find that such an attitude is tainted with negativity in the form of hidden resentment, and so is not surrender at all by masked resistance. As you surrender, direct your attention inward to check if there is any trace of resistance left inside you. Be very alert when you do so. Otherwise, a pocket of resistance may continue to hide in some dark corner in the form of a thought or an unacknowledged emotion. So, when we are talking about surrendering, it's not that we are falling weak, or it's not that we are not working on the situation. It is just that we are accepting things as they are without judging them or labeling them, and definitely coming up with an action plan of what it is we can do now. अगर मैं किसी एक सिचुएशन में फंस गया हूँ which can be fatal to me in the sense कि it's slightly in a different
1 second. Working on that. Still on it. I'm having some trouble with the connection. Please try again in a moment.
Universe is talking to you.